Ante todo pedimos disculpas por la demora en el comienzo de nuestro taller, porque hemos tenido problemas técnicos que resolver. No es nada extraordinario en estos tiempos para nosotros, pero vamos a realizar la actividad como la tenemos prevista, en el mismo orden y todo. Les pido, aunque tengo que mirar para un lado por pena, pero les pido que contemplen lo que se prevé en cuanto al tiempo por exposición, sobre todo ahora que se nos ha reducido más todavía. Nuestro panel Democracia y Participación es un panel que por su contenido sin duda que será interesante y además necesario por la actualización que podemos obtener todos a partir de las intervenciones de los ponentes. Tenemos 3 ponentes. Les pido que cumplan, les reitero, con los 15 minutos de exposición y le correspondería, en este caso, a Olga Borodkina, profesora de San Petersburgo en la Universidad de Rusia.
Okay, good evening, dear colleagues. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to have the chance to speak and to talk. And I really appreciate the organizers of this really great conference for really great events, I would say. So it's my first time in Cuba, in Latin America, so I really appreciate about all this stuff. And of course, I'm very glad this opportunity to talk on this conference. So my topic, and just I said, sorry, just a couple of words about myself. My primary research interest in concerning the social policy and social work. Social policy and social work, it's especially the post-Soviet countries, it's always was the fields where not so much maybe democratic and participants. So it's almost was the spheres where the government, the state make the crucial decision, and the people just, and population just try to follow the decision made by the state. But during the last few years, last maybe 10, 15 years, the situation really changed. And it's connected with really new context, social context, and also general situation. It's also new risk connected with demographic problems and challenges with the climate. So all this new risk actually required the new mechanism of social policy. The old social policy does not work right now in this new situation. And the great turbulence, great uncertainty, and very discussing concept. And one of the new trend which we see not only in Russia and in other countries is connected with the social investment. Social investment, it's an approach that was seen as a means of the overcoming new social risk. The development of social investment has seen as a way to achieve a certain balance between the market nature of economical development and the preservation, and also to providing the social protection of the citizens in welfare state. So social investment assumes the redistribution of funding from the passive cash transfer to the mechanism of empowering of citizens. So in other way, the old social policy is mostly connected with the cash transfer or cash benefits directly to certain social groups which are needed to this. For example, the very poor people, or with a family with a lot of children, or another way. And new this social investment approach supposed to funding for another principle. What does it mean? First of all, the main area of social investment policy which were identified by experts are the following spheres. first of all, human capital, then many cases not really provides a balance between economical benefits and social benefits. And many experts supposed that the frame of social investment policy, social goals are subordinate to economical goals. So this primary idea about balance of economical and social goals, in fact, in the practice, in many countries, transform that the economical points are the first and the social interest in go the second. So, many experts, and not only from academical sphere, but also from practical, really now criticize the social investors for this point. And another expert considers the social policy as a new liberal approach in the social sphere with emphasize market mechanism. So there is special discussion, and I don't want to take attention for this point about new liberal politics. But in social policy, new liberalism, it was really a lot of criticized that it's not really provide good social protection for the most citizens. And neoliberal approach which start in the West countries and the later in other countries since the latest 70s, 80s from last century, now have a lot of criticism criticize, and actually in many countries now the authorities try to declare that we are not really following new liberalism in the social policy. So, but this point it's now discussing already connected with the social investment. So I would also to present some results of the empirical research which we provide in Russia. So in the frame of the rather big research project concerning the transformation of welfare state, we conducted expert interview, and the experts were from non-government organization, from state organization, public, social enterprises, authorities in different Russian regions. And I also have to mention that Russia is the country which very, very huge difference between different regions. So actually some experts said that it's not only one country like Russia, that there is different countries connected with region. So this difference is not only about the economic level, it's also about the social, some social levels, it's also connected with the population structure and so on, so on, so on. So in our research, we try to involve the experts from different regions, how to have the opportunity to see how the social investment works in different parts of the Russia. So, and in results, we have most of our experts said that the social investment policy primary is need to improve the efficiently to state policy at the regional level. So this is interesting point that in fact social policy is usually works like the general federal level of the policy, but the expert said that it should be realized on the regional level. And social investment is that the mechanism that could support to realize regional social policy, not like general country policy. This is really important point. But another important point connected with the question, who should be the main investor in social sphere? And in this point, there is rather big difference between the answers of our expert and, for example, with the approach West approach, because social investment was development in West countries. It was connected primarily with business or private initiative. But it's interesting that the Russian experts suppose that investor should be state. It does not matter, federal or regional by state. in this point, it's actually like internal conflict between social investment and the idea of the social investment and the social policy. So it's still the social investment, I remind that it starts like opportunity to go away from the strong connections or strong influence of the state. But in fact, the practice, how it realized, or at least how it's expected to be realized by our experts, that it should be also connected with the state. State, federal state, or regional state should be the investor in this case. And another point is, of course, connected with the activity of the citizens themselves. So, because the task of the social investment is also to stimulate the activity of the citizens to independently meet their social needs, to accelerate the development of market relations by stimulating various type of interpretation business activity of the citizens, and also to overcome the paternalistic attitudes, which are rather still strong in the Russia. And in this case, also, the data of our research supposed that the citizens are not really active, also connected their own needs. They're still expected that the state should support them, and they are not, and they're very passive, trying to solve their own social problems. And of course, it's also a little conflict with the main idea of the social investment. And also some another interesting research results about the most popular form of the investment. And our experts supposed that there is two main areas from social investment. First of all, it's personal investment in the digitalization. Of course, there should be different reason for that decision, but maybe one of them that it's still the main customers of the social services. It's still older people, elderly people, and the level of digital capital of elderly people still rather low in Russia, and the skills, technological or skills to have computer or another kind of technological skills still very poor. And probably the expert, when they talk about where it should be done investment, suppose that because our clients are not really good with all this technological stuff, so please do not really invest a lot, because it could not meet the real using this. So, but it's still not a lot of experts supposed that the social investment could provide social security and economical efficiently at the same time. So many of them are still supposed that it could be some conflict between this.
Profesora. A continuación, William Boerum, representante de la Fundación Internacional de Ciudades Hermanadas, Construyendo Elecciones Confiables, hará su intervención.
Just briefly about myself, I am a publicly elected official in California, USA, been involved in many campaigns, and have also assisted in conducting elections in local jurisdictions. So I speak to you from that standpoint. So, dear colleagues, now to participate in an event of even broader intention, and to confer with you in sharing our common motivation for the theme of with all for the good of all. With the several agenda subjects suggested for discussion, I am pleased to address construction of a participatory and effective democracy. Though not a student of the thoughts and works of Jose Marti, I do know that his advocacy were behind the scenes, pulling the strings of elections. And Marti criticized and condemned the elites of the United States as they pulled strings from behind the scenes. Sadly, Marti's observations about elites continue to ring true more than a century in more complex and disillusioning ways in the United States. However, I honestly believe that structurally, the institutions of democratic elections in the United States continue to move toward a more perfect embodiment of our revolutionary ideals. Among those is government by the consent of the governed, and implied for our times is encouraging more citizens to vote, thereby participating in democracy. So I say that integral among the building blocks to conduct a participatory and effective democracy is voter participation in elections. Higher voter participation is achieved when voters trust the process and trust in the results. Now, this is summed up in the words free and fair elections. In terms of actual process, this involves the following: providing ballots, receiving those ballots, ensuring the ballots, securing the ballots, counting the ballots in a transparent way, and announcing the results in a timely manner. Related to these activities is maintaining accurate and valid voter rolls. The people infrastructure to conduct elections involves public officials responsible for the rules, administrators and staff, and ad hoc day of inspectors and clerks. Also, there is a role for the unofficial poll watchers designated by candidates. Around these several actors, there are procedures mentioned above which are designed to assure voters that their ballots will be received and counted accurately, thus ensuring an effective democracy with a basis in trust. Over time in the US, as well as European democracies, voter participation has declined. Among the efforts by various jurisdictions is to increase voter participation has been moving from the election day model of one day on which to vote on to various forms of early and extended voting. In the US, each of the 50 states has the authority to set its own voting rules and practices. With the recent and rapid expansion of voting by mail, the differences between the states in conducting elections have magnified. I will talk in detail a bit about how elections are conducted in my home county of Sonoma, California, based on my experience as an election official. Thanks to Deva Marie Proto, Registrar of Voters, for providing a lot of detail, leaving little doubt about the integrity of conducting an election. Now, in the traditional mode in the US and in Sonoma, ballots are and were provided to voters when they arrived at the polling place. However, showing either identification by a card or simply writing their name and address. And on being admitted to the polling place, they could then receive the ballots or get a special ballot if needed. And the ballot signatures were compared to those on file. Questionable signatures are followed up in every effort to qualify the vote of people showing up. Although we expanded the vote by mail process, sending them out to every voter, most people still did not mail them back. They brought them into the precinct. In other words, they had the past behavior of going to a polling place and voting, but they would bring them in rather than put them in the mail. Now, in November 2022 election in Sonoma County, only 42% of the mail ballots were in fact returned by mail. 29% were returned to drop boxes located around the county. 14% were dropped at voting centers, 7% used the drop box at the registrar's office, and 3% were carried into the office. So the physical infrastructure to receive the mail ballots included secure mail drop boxes and voting centers. Of all the mail ballots received, 43% were received on election day. Now, in the old days, not long ago, when I started as an election clerk, the ballots were deposited in locked ballot boxes at each polling place. They were counted into different categories by the election clerks, a document prepared and signed by the inspector, and all the ballots, plus election materials, were taken to a collection point by two people, the inspector and one of the clerks, and then they were trucked to the local government office. At that office, there were and are windows for the public to watch the machines count the ballots. In the current prevailing mode, mail ballots are received over a period of time, having been mailed to all the voters, as I said before, a month before the election date. And the processing is ongoing, with machines doing a lot of the work. Envelopes sliced open, organized, sorted, signatures photographed and checked, and votes are counted and accumulated by partial tallies, but results not announced until election day. And throughout this process, there was a chain of custody maintained. In the past, as well as currently, the election day staff at each polling place or voting center includes people recruited from the community. They are paid for that day only. In prior years, when in-person voting was the mode, much was made of the opportunity for supporters of candidates to be volunteer poll watchers. They could check the list of who had already voted, and in a duplicate list, they could then compare who had voted and who had not voted, and maybe some of those people had promised to vote for their candidate, so they would then call them up and make sure they got out to vote. So that was a role for volunteer political people. Maintaining an up-to-date, accurate voter registry is an obligation of government, for it is better that the rolls be maintained on an ongoing basis rather than one-off or periodic purging of the voter rolls. A variety of sources can be used for updates, ongoing updates to the voter rolls. As I said, massive purging can only lead to charges of voter suppression, undermining public confidence and trust. Despite the structures and procedures put in place, discontented candidates and parties may claim fraud and suppression. Unless there is straightforward evidence of widespread manipulation, such demagoguery undermines the legitimacy of elections and is a threat to democracy, leading to violence. This was evident in the aftermath of the U.S. presidential election in 2020, and more recently in the reaction to the presidential election a few weeks ago in Brazil. For presidential and parliamentary elections, for presidential and parliamentary elections, external disciplines and oversight can prove worthwhile to assist the adoption of trustworthy procedures and transparency. The foremost discipline for external observation is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and through its Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. These election observation missions are conducted only at the invitation of the host government, and they're composed of certified multinational teams. Preliminary and detailed final reports are rendered commenting on the conduct of the election. In conclusion, I believe that conducting free and fair elections worthy of the trust of the voters and of the governed can build a participatory democracy for solidarity and in collaboration with civil society and non-governmental organizations. This will alleviate the social challenges faced by peoples in all countries. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes. So my Spanish is exhausted, I shift to English. Well, I'm supposed to speak today about disillusionment with democracy and political corruption, ways, and the title of my presentation, ways towards citizens' participation against corruption and enhancement of democracy. I will not bother you a lot. I need perhaps, if at all, 15 minutes at most. Well, what I will very briefly present today is based on the findings of two major EU projects financed by the European Commission that I coordinated at the University of Constance in Germany. Despite my name, I'm a German, and whose results I have been carrying forward since 2013 until today. These were the research projects Crime and Culture. This was the short title of the project. It was about perceptions of corruption in Europe. And ALACs. ALACs are the initials of Advocacy and Legal Advice Centers. The latter, the ALACs project was conducted in cooperation with Transparency International, the world's largest anti-corruption initiative. Well, what I'm going now to summarize reflects 5 years of research. In a few words, our findings can be summarized on the basis of 3 premises. First, awareness. In order to be able to fight or curb corruption at all, one has to make citizens as well as elites, both political and economic elites, aware of the problem. It should become clear to everybody that corruption, in the end, or in the best case, is a zero-sum game for everyone involved. As far as this need is concerned, awareness, it is not official government agencies or international organizations that take on this responsibility on their own, but the field of action of civil society organizations such as Transparency International. Secondly, judiciary. Fighting corruption is not possible without a reasonably free judicial system. Insofar as we are not dealing with the case of a corrupt judiciary itself, as is apparently the case in many countries around the globe, an independent judiciary is the sine qua non prerequisite for curbing corruption. It is no coincidence that in the framework of international projects to fight corruption, supported by major international organizations such as the EU or the UN, one of the first measures to fight corruption is the reconstruction of the judicial system. Thirdly, and this is my main point today, active citizens' participation. Finally, corruption cannot be successfully fought without providing opportunities for active participation of citizens, either as victims or witnesses, whistleblowers of corruption. Today, there is a globally accurate mechanism, available mechanism of citizen participation against corruption, namely the ALACs I told you in the beginning, the Advocacy and Legal Advice Centers, which have been launched by Transparency International in more than 100 countries around the globe. Now it will take a lot of time to explain how these centers work, but this mechanism is available. Well, finally, it is a specific form of corruption, namely political corruption, which is particularly harmful to democracy and is responsible for the widespread phenomenon today of citizens distancing themselves in Western democratic countries themselves from political participation. Why? Political corruption is in most of the cases not punishable by law. Political corruption is usually linked to nepotism, for example, or to the phenomenon of the so-called revolving door, when politicians get lucrative positions in the private sector after their public office. Let me give you one more example. The former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, that after his office got a very lucrative job in Gazprom in Russia. It is exactly this type of behavior by many politicians in all democratic countries around the globe that in the end damages democracy, because it inevitably leads to a mistrust of citizens to democratic institutions as a whole. Only if free media and an independent judiciary, if available, can the phenomenon be combated and a greater damage of democratic institutions avoided. So this was a summary about the projects I carried out, and these have been our results. Now, before coming to Cuba, I asked myself, and this is now something additional, not research, but additional thoughts to what was done by me until now. So before coming to Cuba, I asked myself, how could the paradigm of Che Guevara be helpful in this regard? And I think there is probably a lot we could learn from Che Guevara regarding exactly this, what I'm speaking about today. Of course, I leave aside the political and revolutionary activism of Che Guevara and will limit myself to his paradigm in moral terms. In this respect, I can think, I think that a few things might be helpful. I do not go so far as to describe the icon Che Guevara as the Christ with a gun, or his function, especially in the European political discourse of the 1960s of the last century, as a kind of secular Christ. My point is to emphasize that the reason why Che Guevara is still alive today is because of his function, especially among those who are socially and economically most vulnerable, as the incarnation of uncompromisingness, modesty, and most importantly, incorruptibility. His dictum, "There's no life outside the revolution," means in this respect the immanent and perpetual consciousness of social responsibility. I underline again social responsibility in all situations and under all circumstances. Such an attitude is perhaps anachronistic today, of course, in times of exaggerated individual choice, increasing flexibility and mobility. But this is precisely why Che Guevara's life, not so much his political ideas in this case, offers itself as a projection surface for all those who are not satisfied with all these postmodern, if you want, capitalistic conditions. Why? One might call this ignorance or foolish Don Quixoticism. Che Guevara described himself as Don Quixote, as in his farewell letter to his parents before he set off again for the jungle in 1965. This was a confession of not wanting to abandon radical idealism, even and especially in an increasingly alienated world. Guevara's admirers still today celebrate his stance as resistance to a form of society in which everything seems to be degraded to a commodity, where every action, no matter in which area of life, is discussed in economic terms and judged according to economic criteria. Those who do not want to come to terms with the political pragmatism that has meanwhile become without alternative, and who only see unimaginative muddling along in sober realpolitik, will find Guevara's Don Quixotery an honorary title, even far from all revolutionary intentions. Finally, Che Guevara's Don Quixoticism is the conditio sine qua non of worldwide civic engagement, especially today when it comes to addressing global challenges such as social injustice, hunger, climate change, war, destruction, or indeed a better citizen-based fight against corruption. Thank you very much.
Muy bien, muy bien. Han terminado las intervenciones de los tres ponentes. Temas interesantísimos, sin duda.
Question for William. Curiosity about the system of election in United States. You compare what happened in Brazil, what happened in United States. So I will ask you something. How do you see the future of elections in United States?
Or external international observers of U.S. elections. I think that a little bit of that has happened by certain groups balloting, sending out ballots by mail, especially in the states where every registered voter receives a ballot. And that process has concerned some people with claims of fraud in the 2020 election. But I think part of it, apart from the demagoguery by Trump and his supporters, it's a new way of doing elections, so there is skepticism about it. But I think in both cases, I don't know that much about Brazil, except that there were supporters that did not see it that way. You know, they don't read the official reports of international observers. So I think they were stirred up, whether it's by the former president or his supporters, I don't know. So I hope that answered your question. But I think elections in the US are made difficult to follow because of the 50 jurisdictions.
Common by right-wingers in general. It's not just in Brazil. And of course, everybody is against corruption. Corruption is a problem. But my question is, how much do you think corruption can be an actual problem for democracy and participation in the world compared to like other big problems?
Yes, thank you. Well, corruption is a problem, used to be a problem. I mean, we are aware about the problem of corruption since now, let's say, more or less 30 years, not more. Since the early 90s. This is the point at which the global discourse on corruption begins. And again, not because of governments, national governments, not because of international organizations, but only because of civil society organizations, the ones who started globally. It is the organization I cooperated with, Transparency International, and then we have a lot of local, since then, local civil society organizations that fight the phenomenon. Well, I don't have a receipt, how to, or a recommendation, concrete recommendation or suggestion how to combat corruption. Corruption was there for all times. I mean, it begins in the Bible. If you are aware about this, is a specific event in the Bible, described in the Bible, that is nothing else than bribery between two brothers. So it begins in the Bible. It's an old phenomenon, and we just started 30 years ago to think about it and started to fight it, because we realized it damages economy in the end. And finally we realized now, since now I would say 20 years, not more, that in various ways it damages democracy itself. Because it's very simple. I mean, corruption destroys trust of citizens to democratic institutions. And this is why you have been speaking about this. Today we have this, global phenomenon in democracies, Western democracies, that participation in elections is getting lower and lower and lower, year by year, every 4 years in all countries. And I think this has to do with this fact. This is why I speak about political corruption, which is not punishable always. Most of the times it is not punishable. Nobody can say to Mr. Schroeder, after your office you cannot become the CEO of Gazprom. This is a job, it's a position, okay? He gets the job and that's it. But the point is, in the eyes of the citizens, of course, in the eyes of the judiciary, this is not punishable. But in the eyes of the citizens, this is not legitimate. This is the point. And this leads finally to a damage in democracy. But again, I don't have a very specific recommendation. I cannot, set like in the Bible, 10 rules according to which you can reach the paradise. I don't have something like this, okay?
¿Preguntas?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Rosario, soy profesora de Cuba. Primero que todo agradezco a los tres ponentes los interesantísimos asuntos abordados con mucha actualidad y que de una u otra manera competen a todos los presentes. Quisiera hacer una pregunta relativa a las elecciones. En muchas ocasiones se escucha casi de manera directa que la realización de la democracia y la participación se obtiene en las urnas, es decir, en los procesos electorales. La pregunta concretamente es, ¿considera usted que resulta suficiente hablar de participación y democracia cuando la estamos subsumiendo a procesos solamente electorales y no a la realización de los programas políticos, que de hecho esas campañas electorales no siempre llegan a realizar post-elecciones? Gracias.
I'm really sorry, but you have to shortly repeat your question or your questions, because I had troubles with my, with interpretation.
Sí, con gusto repito la pregunta, solo que la estoy haciendo no asociado a la corrupción, que fue el tema presentado, sino a las elecciones. No vista solamente en la experiencia que el ponente expresó, sino escuchando su apreciación sobre un fenómeno que es muy recurrente en la sociedad contemporánea y tiene que ver a la relación directa que se hace, que la realización de los procesos democráticos y participativos están sola y únicamente vinculados a la realización de elecciones. Y en nuestro criterio, en nuestro modesto criterio, la participación y la democracia es, y en ello refiero al comandante en jefe Fidel Castro, cuando se realizan las necesidades de esos electores que son mayoría y ellos participan en esa realización. Lo que quisiera es escuchar la apreciación que tiene el ponente sobre lo relativo a las elecciones y su vínculo con la democracia y la participación.
Well, I understand your question. Well, I cannot generalize my view. I speak about citizens' participation against the background of corruption, nothing else. And especially against the background of political corruptions, because we have several forms, different forms of corruption: petty corruption, grand corruption, structural corruption, high-level corruption, street-level corruption. I speak only about political corruption in this respect, in this session. And I don't speak about elections, the relationship about elections and participation, about democracy and elections. This is, of course, a broader field. And to be honest, I'm not prepared to speak about it. This is a big discussion, of course. I understand your point, fully understand your point. It's a bigger discussion, but I restricted myself to this specific problem. To which extent is political corruption responsible for less participation by citizens in democracies? This was my very, very narrow view, actually.
So, as I said in my talk, and has also been acknowledged by others here, that the decline in voter participation in the U.S. and Western Europe was the result of factors, political corruption, disenchantment with the process. So I think a major effort was directed to increase participation by getting more ballots out to every voter. So mail out the ballots and everyone will have it. Of course, that was a convenient approach by the Democratic Party, if I can be partisan. The Democratic Party that would bring out more of their natural constituencies. So, and it was partially successful in these close elections. Trump carried certain states in 2016, and because more votes were out there, more ballots, the Democrats carried certain states in 2020. So anyway, but I think that the mail ballot is a good thing to do to get ballots in the hands of people. So we'll see if that works. So far, the case has not been proven, but the aim was to get more voter participation to counter the long-term downtrend.
Bien, solamente una pregunta más. Sí, usted fue la que... Una pregunta más y la respuesta pedimos por favor que sea directa, concreta.
Hola, perdón. Mi nombre es Deborah. I'm from Brazil, and I will. I don't know. I'm speaking 3 languages in last 3 days, so I'm trying to speak in English. My question is not exactly a question. Is more a reflection for both of you, the 3 of us, of you. When I was hearing you to talk about how the corruption and how the democracy can be different in each country, and how it can be changed by actions by the population, I was thinking more in what we can do and what kind of actions and politics, social politics, that we can propose to change this kind of situation as the corruption and to achieve the free and fair elections. Because I was thinking that when we say that our population do not read, do not know, it's a kind of lazy answer for this kind of things. Maybe we can propose something more. Thank you.
Muy breve, por favor, muy breve.
Well, you know, all of us, since the French Revolution, we try to realize freedom, equality, and solidarity, fraternity. Karl Marx found a way how to realize fraternity, solidarity in society, because the French themselves, they didn't give an answer to this, to the last one, the third demand. But all of us, in all countries since then, regardless if communist countries, capitalistic countries, we actually try to realize freedom, equality, and solidarity, right? So this must be, regarding what the problem is, regarding what the consideration is, and regarding what kind of challenges we face, we always must bear in mind what we have to realize is freedom, equality, and fraternity, solidarity in society. So that's all.
Usted.
It's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Philip. I'm from Canada. I just want to make an observation about this debate. Number one, I would say that the issue is not corruption. The issue is impunity. That in Western liberal democracies, you have a party system that has marginalized the people. And so the role of the people is very important in revitalizing the democracy. I want to give an example of Brazil. The Brazilian people organized to bring a government of Lula. It was a pro-social government, bringing many, many social reforms. That government was undermined by the US, the US government, which organized to undermine the government of Lula. These are historical facts, okay? So I think the point I want to make here is the fact that liberal democracy and the party system is finished. And every nation and people across the globe, including the great American people, have to find the means by which they can give voice to their aspirations to revitalize the democracy, not on the basis of 19th century definitions. I appreciate what Bob was saying, William was saying about Jose Marti, appreciating what was going on in the United States in the 19th century. If Jose Marti was alive today, he would freak out about what's going on in the United States. The democracy in the United States, if I can make a comment as a neighbor of the States, is in crisis. There's a civil war situation there between two ruling factions. So you have the Trump forces and then you have the Biden forces. Liberal democracy has governments of the oligarchs. Mr. Biden's son is an oligarch in Ukraine right now as we speak. So it is the meddling of countries in other countries. It is the right of all people to decide the content of their democracy. Democracy is not a form. And it's not about how many parties you have or how efficient the electoral process is. The fact of the matter is, as Dr. Angelos has identified, no matter how much money is being put into trying to get people to vote, they know that voting is not democracy. Voting is the beginning of allowing them to be victims of impunity. So the issue before humanity of all our countries is how do you revitalize the democracy in the image of the people, a modern democracy. Thank you.
Solo un detalle. Si Martí volviera, no se moriría, sino que lucharía. Otra pregunta, a ver.
Gracias. En Brasil tenemos 100 personas que tienen la misma riqueza que 100 millones. ¿Qué tipo de democracia es? Si durante las elecciones se paga mucho dinero para que las personas voten, como en los Estados Unidos también gastan mucho dinero para elecciones. ¿Dónde está la libertad, la justicia y la igualdad? en democracia.
Yo creo que ha sido muy interesante y productivo. ¿Bien? Vamos. Rapidito.
Hi, my name is Davika Bisasar. I'm from the island Bonaire, and we were hopping in various conferences or rooms, and we were propelled to visit this one the last few minutes. And I don't have a question, but I'd just like to say that we are facing an illegal annexation on our island by the Dutch. Bonaire is close to Venezuela, 50 miles outside of Venezuela. We are part of what we call the ABC Islands. And in 2010, Bonaire was illegally annexed by the Dutch kingdom without the consent of the people. And we traveled all the way from Bonaire to Cuba to follow this conference, and we have no democracy on our island. We are being ruled after 2010 by The Hague, and they make all the laws. Even though we had a referendum where my colleague, he's outside, he stood 222 days refusing to leave the government office for a referendum. The people voted in that referendum. After 222 days, the government gave a referendum, and the referendum, 66% of Bonairean people voted against the Dutch structure that we are in today. Yet The Hague did not accept the people's decision. So that's why we are fighting for our rights to be listed on the non-self-governing territories of United Nations. Thank you.
Punta, ¿verdad? Porque casi no hay tiempo tampoco. Me parece que ha sido un buen encuentro. Me parece que se han planteado ideas muy interesantes y necesarias de escuchar para que nos pongamos a pensar y a actuar. No estamos actuando. Bien, yo creo que ha sido un buen encuentro, que en realidad se han hecho buenas intervenciones, buenas presentaciones, incluyendo la de la profesora. Se han hecho buenas intervenciones, preguntas suficientes y respuestas de calidad. Por tanto, creo que nos podemos ir satisfechos de este encuentro de saberes y de prácticas. Muchas felicidades a ustedes y a ustedes también las gracias por su participación, y les esperamos nuevamente en Cuba a los que no son de Cuba. Hemos concluido.